A young boy named Percy sees something strange outside his classroom and goes to the school's roof to confirm what he thinks he saw. The school headmaster eventually runs to the roof to take him away because it's unsafe for him to be there alone. Since there's also nothing on the roof, the headmaster thinks Percy is a weird kid. However, as the boy is dragged back to class, a flying horse suddenly appears on top of another building, but no one sees it. Shortly after, Percy is taken to a counselor who asks several questions about the strange horse the boy claimed he saw. Percy still insists that he saw something and has frequently seen things like that. The counselor then mentions that he's only making those things up in his mind. Following this, Percy returns to his class, but days later he sees another strange animal walking on the road, though it eventually turns into a disposal truck. Percy starts to believe it's all in his mind, but some of his fellow students have already started calling him a weird boy. Years later, Percy continues to see strange creatures, but he now feels more confident talking about them with his new friend, Grover, who also seems interested in learning about such things. Unfortunately, he also becomes a target for bullies in the school, but this doesn't stop him from talking to Percy about Greek gods and monsters he knows. One day, while the boys are on a school trip to a museum, their teacher, Mr. Brunner, shows all the students different statues of Greek gods in the place. After he's done, he tells them to choose one Greek god
How it makes you feel.
and write what they think about the statue. Percy goes straight to a statue of a god named Perseus. He then remembers visiting the same museum with his mom many years ago. On that day, his mom, Sally, told him that she actually named him after Perseus.
That's who you're named after.
Percy thinks Perseus has to be a hero because he's holding a monster's head, but Sally says that things might not always seem as good or bad as they look. She adds that she named Percy after the god because he and his mom had to survive a terrible life until they eventually found their happy ending. Suddenly, Percy returns to reality, and a bully named Nancy makes fun of him for zoning out. Percy seems angry, but before he says anything, a teacher named Mrs. Dodds tells him to learn to control his emotions.
You will learn to control yourself, do you understand?
Percy doesn't get why she's scolding him instead of Nancy, and as the bully makes fun of him again, Mr. Brunner intervenes and tells the girl to stop. He then tells Percy not to pay attention to Nancy and her friends. He adds that when the gods think he's ready, they'll tell him what they have in store for him. Percy looks confused, but Brunner then gives him a pen and says he'll need it. He adds that it's a mighty instrument, and Percy thanks him because he'll now be able to use it to fill his worksheet.
It is a mighty instrument.
After a while, Percy sits outside the museum with Grover, who tries to make an excuse for why Nancy is a bully. Percy thinks she's just a bad person and that someone needs to stand up to her one day. Grover advises him not to do that, but as Nancy throws something at his friend, Percy gets pissed. He then stands up to speak to her, but as he gets too close, he magically pushes her into the fountain without touching her. As Percy wonders what happened, he feels something vibrating in his pocket and realizes that it's the pen Brunner gave him. While the other students are trying to help Nancy out of the fountain, Mrs. Dodds turns into a monster and slowly walks toward Percy while calling him a half-blood. Before Percy says anything, she knocks him down and tries to kill him, but the pen in his hand magically turns into a sword, which he uses to stab her. This makes her vanish instantly, but Percy passes out. When he wakes up, Percy asks Brunner and Grover if they saw Mrs. Dodds turn into a monster.
Where's Mrs. Dodds?
However, they tell him that they don't know anyone with that name. After the kids return to school, the headmaster asks Percy what happened, and he says he didn't push Nancy. This seems hard to believe because he was the only one close to her before it happened, but Percy insists that he didn't do anything. As the headmaster then asks Grover what happened, the boy suddenly confesses that his friend had told him earlier about standing up to Nancy.
I do.
Percy cannot believe this, but with Grover's betrayal, the headmaster expels him from the school. While Percy waits outside the school for his ride home, Brunner comes over to ask the boy what really happened. Percy says no one would believe it, but Brunner smiles and says he has met other troubled kids who turned out to be special. Percy doesn't want to hear this, and he tells Brunner that he's tired of people calling him special because of the strange things he keeps seeing.
Stop.
As his ride home arrives, he enters the truck and leaves the school. When he gets home, he meets his lazy stepdad, Gabe, and asks about his mom. Before he says where Sally is, Gabe scolds Percy for getting expelled, but the boy says he didn't do anything wrong. Shortly after, he finally finds Sally, who looks happy to see him back home. She also tells him that she believes he didn't push Nancy. Despite this, Percy says he's starting to get scared of his imagination because of how often it gets him in trouble.
I'm scared.
Sally feels sorry for him and immediately calls Gabe to get his car keys so she can take her son to a cabin where he can clear his head. While on the trip to the cabin, Percy has a dream in which he hears a voice telling him to run away before he gets hurt. As he wakes up, he sees that they've already arrived at the cabin, so he goes in with his mom. Shortly after, Percy sits with his mom to talk about his frequent daydreaming habit. He adds that something happened at the museum, but he was the only one who could see it. Sally then asks what the woman said.
What did she say to you?
And Percy looks shocked and asks how his mom knew the person he saw at the museum was a woman. As he tries to get an answer, Sally asks why he thinks she always brings him to the cabin for their yearly vacation. Percy says it's likely because the place is cheap, but Sally tells him that it belongs to his dad. Percy has never met his dad before, and he asks what Sally means. Sally then tells him that his dad is a Greek god she met many years ago at the cabin. She adds that Percy is a demigod,
You fell in love with God?
or half-blood, but the boy doesn't believe this. As he complains about how he thinks his mom is telling him stories to make him feel better, Grover knocks on the door. Percy still feels betrayed by what his best friend did, so he tells Sally not to talk to him, but she still goes to answer the door. Sally then says he came too early, but Grover mentions that they don't have much time anymore.
So the important thing is not to panic.
As he enters the cabin and talks about being scared of what's coming, Percy sees that his friend now has goat legs. This leaves him shocked, but when he asks about it, Grover smiles and asks if Sally still hasn't told Percy about him. Sally says she was getting there, but as Percy still looks confused, he asks what's happening. Sally then mentions that they'll tell him more when they get to the car. While they're back on the road, Grover tells Percy that he's a satyr who was meant to guide him to the present moment.
I'm a satyr.
He adds that he's Percy's protector, and he got him expelled because he knew they had to leave the city and head for a safe haven for half-bloods called Camp. Percy looks confused by this, but Grover says he is sorry for not telling him anything earlier. He adds that after Dodds attacked Percy, he just knew they had to run. Percy is shocked to hear that his friend saw the monster,
So you knew.
but Grover says he couldn't see her well. He also mentions that she was using a special mist to hide her wings, and that it's also what he uses to hide his legs. He adds that Dodd's attack seems to be the beginning of whatever is coming. As Percy then asks his mom what else she hasn't told him, they all see a monster called a Minotaur chasing them. Percy is surprised to see that such a monster is real, but Grover mentions that all the monsters he used to tell his friend about are real. Suddenly, the monster runs really fast and knocks them off the road. Luckily, Sally, Percy, and Grover survive the crash, and they start walking in the woods. As they see that they've gotten closer to camp, Grover tells Percy that he'll be safe there because monsters can't get in. Just then, Sally tells Grover to promise to take care of her son. Grover does this, and as Sally says she's heading back to slow down the monster, Percy asks why she can't just come along. Sally says it's because she's human, and she forces him to accept her decision.
I can't go with you.
She also tells him to remember everything she has taught him and all the stories she told him. She adds that Percy should stop thinking he's broken because he's special. Just then, she takes his jacket from him so that she can use it to confuse the monster into following her instead. After she heads back to distract the monster, he eventually grabs her and crushes her until she vanishes. Percy sees this and gets pissed, so he brings out his sword and attacks the monster. Unfortunately, he loses his sword in the fight but finds another weapon, which he uses to stab and kill the monster. He passes out immediately, but when he wakes up, he sees some kids around him before a man with horse legs then welcomes him to the camp. Percy still feels weak, and he passes out again. When he slightly opens his eyes after a few hours, he sees a girl watching him in his room, and as he asks where he is,
Where am I?
The girl just tells him that he drools in his sleep. Much later, when Percy fully wakes up, he sees Grover beside him. He also sees the monster's horn on the table, and Grover says he had to take it to show everyone what Percy did. Percy realizes that everything that happened the previous night was real. He also feels sad about his mom, but Grover apologizes for being unable to do anything for her. Percy tells him not to blame himself, and he also heads out of the room, saying he needs to find his father.
So I'm gonna go find him.
Before Grover can stop him, he leaves and eventually finds a man named Dionysus. As Percy asks to see his dad, Dionysus says he's the boy's father. Before Percy asks any more questions, Dionysus directs him to a place where the boy can get a drink for him. Grover suddenly sees them talking and tells Percy that if he wants answers, Dionysus is not the person to talk to.
You really don't want to start with this guy.
Just then, Brunner walks up to them, and Percy sees that he's the man with horse legs. As Percy says he's going to get a drink for his father, Brunner tells him that Dionysus is not his father. He then says that Zeus has banned Dionysus from drinking, so he's trying to send a demigod to help him take the drink instead. He adds that sometimes gods send demigods to do what they're forbidden to do. Shortly after, he tells Percy to walk with him.
Walk with me.
And as they go around camp, the boy mentions that he misplaced his sword during the fight with the monster. However, Brunner tells him to check his pocket. Percy finds it there and looks surprised, but Brunner tells him that the pen will always find its way back to him unless he gives it up to someone. Later on, Brunner shows Percy the different houses of all the gods who have children. Percy then asks where he belongs, but Brunner tells him that he hasn't been claimed yet.
You haven't been claimed, Percy.
He adds that getting claimed might take a while, but Percy feels his dad probably doesn't want him. As he asks where he'll be staying, Brunner says he'll have to live with the kids of the Greek god named Hermes. After Brunner takes Percy to the house, he introduces all the kids to the newcomer, but they don't say anything. Percy then goes to his bed, but as a boy named Luke and some other kids come to meet him, he begs them to let him settle down before they start bullying him. However, Luke says he's not like that, and he also says sorry to Percy for what happened to his mom.
I have to say I'm really sorry.
Elsewhere, Grover starts to think about how Sally died, so he goes to meet the members of an elders' council on camp. He then asks if there's a reason why Sally could have vanished like a demon, even though she's human. After he gets an answer, he goes to inform Brunner and Dionysus that Sally could still be alive because the council told him that the way she died is only possible if Hades snatched her body before she got crushed. Despite this,
But doesn't he deserve to know the truth?
Brunner and Dionysus tell him not to inform Percy, and this leaves Grover confused. Later that night, Percy has a dream in which he hears a monster asking if he wants justice for how his father has ignored him since he was born. He suddenly wakes up looking scared, and Luke tells him that it's quite normal to have scary nightmares. As they walk outside, a girl named Clarice tries to bully Percy for being the new kid. She also tells him that she doesn't believe he killed the monster.
Wait, so this is the kid who killed the Minotaur?
After she walks away, Luke tells Percy not to be bothered by Clarice. He adds that she's one of Auri's kids, and it's how they mostly behave. Percy then asks why she didn't try to mess with him, and one of Luke's friends tells him that it's because Luke is the best swordsman in the camp. Since Luke is good at fighting, Percy begs the boy to teach him all he needs to know to make his father claim him.
Where do we start?
After a few hours of trying several things, Percy ends up being bad at using different weapons, but Luke still says he's sure his new friend will find something he's good at. Shortly after, a bell rings, and as Percy asks what it's for, Luke says it's time to give the gods their burnt offering so they can ask for whatever they want. Instead of asking for anything during his offering, Percy pretends to speak to his mom. He then tells her that he'll make his dad notice him.
I'm gonna make him come down here.
On his way back to his room, he gets attacked by Clarice and her friends, who take him into the restroom. As they try to make him drink the toilet water, he magically uses it to attack them. Clarice and her friends immediately run out of the bathroom, but a girl named Annabeth comes in. Percy remembers seeing her while he was in the infirmary, and he asks if she's stalking him. She says she is, and as he asks why, she mentions that she needs him to win a game called Catch the Flag.
When capture the flag?
The next day, Luke tells Percy about the camp's usual mock war tournament. As Percy asks him about Annabeth, Luke says she has led her team to win the tournament 3 times in a row. He adds that she's one of Athena's daughters. Percy asks how he knows her so well, and Luke says she's like his sister. He then tells Percy about how he found Annabeth and a forbidden girl named Thalia on his way to the camp. Percy asks what he means by forbidden, and Luke says that forbidden children are demigods who were born after the 3 Greek brothers, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, formed a pact to stop having children. Luke says that forbidden children always attract trouble, and during their trip to the camp, Thalia didn't make it. He adds that even though Annabeth felt bad because of it, she eventually became the strongest warrior in the camp, and she's only waiting to prove herself by going on a quest. Percy asks what that has to do with him,
What does this have to do with me?
and Luke says that Brunner has always told Annabeth about a demigod who would come to the camp and be sent on a quest. He adds that Annabeth just wants to know if the demigod is Percy. Shortly after, the game starts, and the boys join Annabeth's team. While Luke leaves to begin a part of Annabeth's plan, she takes Percy through the woods and shows him where he needs to stay. As Percy wonders why he's staying in the middle of the woods, Annabeth wears her invisibility cap and leaves. Shortly after, Clarice and her friends find Percy and decide to take revenge for what he did the other day. Percy doesn't know how to fight, so he runs away. He eventually falls and gets injured, but before Clarice gets to him, he stands up and tries to run from her. When she finally catches him, Percy surprisingly starts fighting really well, and he even breaks Clarice's weapon. This gets her pissed, but before she can hurt him, Luke leads Annabeth's other team members to drop the flag that wins the tournament for Annabeth again. After Clarice walks away angrily because her team lost, Annabeth appears in front of Percy, and he looks shocked to see that she was actually standing there the whole time. Suddenly, she pushes him into the river, and as Percy wonders why she did that, his injuries start to heal. Following this, a trident appears in the sky, and Brunner tells Percy that Poseidon has claimed him. However, because he's a forbidden child, he's made to stay alone in a different house. Shortly after, Brunner and Dionysus call Percy to inform him that his father has given him a quest. As he asks what they mean, Brunner says that Zeus' bolt is missing, and he's trying to blame Percy's father for it, even though he knows nothing about it. Interestingly, Poseidon believes Hades took the bolt to turn his brothers against each other to start a war. Since Percy will eventually be framed as the culprit who helped his dad steal the bolt,
I didn't do anything.
Brunner tells the boy that his quest is to find and return it to Zeus before the summer solstice in a week. Percy doesn't get why he needs to do anything for a man who has ignored him since he was a baby. Brunner and Dionysus mention that Poseidon is still his dad, but Percy says he only recognizes Sally as his mom. Just as he still argues that he can't go, Grover comes in and tells Percy to accept the quest because his mom might be in Hades' palace. Percy is shocked to hear this, but Brunner and Dionysus don't say anything about it. Since Percy might find his mother on his quest, he agrees to go, so Brunner tells him to visit an oracle to get confirmation that he needs to go on the quest. When he gets there, the oracle takes Gabe's form and tells Percy that his quest is to retrieve the stolen bolt. He also gives Percy more details on how the quest will go. Shortly after, Brunner tells Percy that he must go to Los Angeles to find Hades because his palace is under the city. He also adds that Percy must choose 2 other kids who will accompany him.
Time is short.
Percy takes Annabeth as his first pick, and after a while he selects Grover as the second person. Grover is shocked by this because there are other powerful kids in the camp, but Percy says he wants his protector instead. Shortly after, Luke gives Percy a pair of flying shoes that might help him during his quest. Percy thanks him for this and apologizes for picking Grover over him, but Luke says he understands. Following this, Percy gets all the necessary supplies for his trip and leaves with Annabeth and Grover for Los Angeles. They eventually board a bus, but Percy doesn't get why they didn't just take a plane. Grover then mentions that Percy would be easier to find inside the plane because Zeus's domain is in the sky. After their bus stops, Annabeth decides to buy snacks in a nearby store. Percy wants to come with her, but she tells him to wait back because she doesn't want him to be seen by a monster. Percy doesn't get why she's being bossy,
I want to vote on whether you get to decide we don't vote.
But Annabeth says she's only doing what's best for the team. After she leaves the bus and enters the store, she sees a woman looking at her strangely and soon realizes that she's a monster. As Annabeth gets back to the bus, she sees another monster named Alecto and asks what she's there for. The woman says she's there to catch Percy, and she offers to let Annabeth go freely if she can lure the boy out of the bus. Annabeth doesn't take this offer.
Some children must learn the hard way.
But as she goes to tell the boys that they need to leave, the woman changes her form and heads for them. As Alecto struggles to walk past the passengers inside the bus, another monster flies in, but Annabeth quickly kills her. Following this, the kids manage to escape and leave Alecto behind. While walking through the woods, Percy suggests calling Brunner for help, but Annabeth thinks it will make them look weak.
We don't need help. We're fine.
Percy doesn't seem to care, and this gets Annabeth pissed. As she asks what he's scared of, Percy says he doesn't know what she's talking about. Before they start fighting, Grover smells something nice coming from outside the woods. After they walk out, they see a house where the smell is coming from. Before they go there, Alecto appears behind them and tells Annabeth that she should have accepted her offer. Grover and Percy don't know what this means, but as Alecto is about to attack them, a Greek goddess named Medusa walks out to them, and they all hide their faces so that she won't look them in the eyes.
She won't bother you as long as you're with me.
It then turns out that Medusa has been cursed to turn anyone she looks at into a stone statue, and now she wears a veil to cover her eyes. Medusa tells Percy and his friends to come into her house because Alecto won't hurt them inside. Despite being initially reluctant, Percy agrees to follow her, but Grover and Annabeth are shocked by this. He then tells them that Sally told him stories about Medusa, which makes him believe she's not as bad as people think.
And I definitely trust my mom.
Shortly after, they all decide to go inside Medusa's house, and Grover thanks Annabeth for joining them. Annabeth says she feels uncomfortable being there because Medusa is her mom's sister. Medusa hears this and tells Annabeth that she understands how she must feel being in the house. Just then, Percy asks what happened to her.
So you're not a monster, what are you then?
And Medusa mentions that Athena actually placed the curse on her. She also tells Annabeth that she once adored Athena until she got betrayed. Annabeth thinks Medusa is lying because her mom is always just, but the lady tells her that the gods always want everyone to believe they don't make mistakes, even though they're bullies. Annabeth still defends Athena, and this gets Medusa pissed. So she calls Percy to the kitchen to speak to him privately. When he joins her there, Medusa tells him not to trust his friends because she feels they'll betray him.
She's going to betray you.
She also offers to help him get rid of them, but Percy quickly runs away to meet his friends. Medusa realizes that he doesn't want her help, so she takes off her veil and starts looking for the kids inside her house. She eventually finds them in the basement, where she locks up the statues of her many victims. Just then, Percy makes Grover wear the flying shoes, while Annabeth wears her invisibility hat as part of a plan to stop Medusa. Following this, Percy goes to attack her alone, but before she can hurt him, Grover distracts her, and Annabeth wears the hat for Medusa. Percy then cuts off Medusa's invisible head, after which he takes it outside and uses it to kill Alecto. Shortly after, Grover sees his uncle's statue in Medusa's basement and looks sad because he thought his uncle was still on a quest to find the god of the wild named Pan. Percy and Annabeth feel bad for him.
This is as far as he got on his quest.
But they mention that they need to leave. Percy then suggests burying Medusa's head with the hat, but Annabeth doesn't want to let go of it because it was a gift from her mom. Percy thinks she's hiding something, and he asks what Alecto meant by giving Annabeth an offer. Grover gets tired of their frequent arguments and scolds them for trying to fight each other. He then asks what Percy is scared about, because he has been trying to fight both of his teammates since they left camp.
What are you so afraid of?
He adds that Percy should understand why Annabeth doesn't want to let go of her hat. Percy then confesses that when he went to see the Oracle, he was told that a friend would betray him on his quest, and that he'd fail to save what matters most in the end. Grover and Annabeth are shocked to hear this, but Percy then mentions that he actually chose them for different reasons. While he decided to choose Annabeth because he thought they couldn't be friends, he chose Grover because he knew that his protector would always be there for him no matter what happens. Annabeth then tells Percy that Alecto wanted her to give him up, but she rejected the offer.
I killed her sister.
Percy says it's what Medusa wanted as well, but he ran away. Following this, Grover says they must continue supporting each other throughout the quest. Shortly after, Percy suggests sending Medusa's head in a box to Olympus, but Annabeth says the gods won't like it. Grover also thinks they'll be in trouble for it because the gods will see it as insulting. However, Percy says it's what they must do to ensure no one else comes in contact with Medusa's head. He also says it's the only way Annabeth will get her hat back. Despite still having doubts about Percy's plan, Annabeth and Grover agree to let him send the head to Olympus through a shipping company owned by Hermes. Shortly after, the kids continue their journey again on a train, and Percy has another dream in which he hears a strange voice saying that he'll continue to attract doom as a forbidden hero. As Percy wakes up, he asks Annabeth what Thalia was like.
What was she like?
And she says the forbidden girl was tough. She adds that, unlike Luke, who trusted her immediately, Thalia wanted her trust to be earned. Percy then realizes that it's what Annabeth also does, and he mentions that he believes the gods are responsible for making people turn that way. He adds that he doesn't understand why people treat those close to them badly, just like the gods always do with their children. Annabeth then tells him that it's not always better with humans. She mentions that before she went to the camp, she lived with her loving father and was treated nicely until he married a new wife who hated her and made her feel neglected and abused. She then adds that, unlike humans, she knows the gods will always be good to her as long as she respects them. Later in the morning, while Percy and his friends are discussing how they'll find their way around Los Angeles,
2 days until we reach Los Angeles.
a cop on the train informs them that the window in their cabin has been broken. The cop also shows them a witness who said she heard some kids breaking it. Annabeth says they didn't do it, but the cop doesn't believe them. As he then gets them monitored by another cop, Annabeth mentions that they can't afford to let anything delay them from reaching Los Angeles. Before they start discussing a plan to get off the train, the woman who claimed to hear them breaking the window sits down with them and tries to be nice to the kids. Suddenly, Grover notices shards of glass on her dress, and the kids realize that she's a monster. Percy tells her to back off because they've had to deal with monsters like her before, but she says that she's not just any monster. She adds that her name is Echidna, the mother of monsters. Grover knows who she is, and he looks really scared, as Echidna then mentions that she believes demigods are a danger to the world.
Are you afraid yet?
She releases her monster pet to chase them. Unfortunately, the pet stings Percy, but the kids still manage to run away and get off the train. They notice that the monster didn't follow them, but Annabeth quickly tells the others that they need to find a place to hide. Luckily, she mentions that Athena has a temple close to them, and after a while, she shows them a very tall arch. As they go inside, Annabeth tells Percy and Grover that they should be safe inside the place. Since it's also a temple, Annabeth tells Percy to try to contact Poseidon, but he says he's not interested in doing that because he doesn't even know his dad very well. Almost immediately, Percy falls and realizes that the sting from Echidna's pet is likely poisonous. Grover and Annabeth take him outside to pour water on him to see if it will wear off the effects of the poison. However, this doesn't work, and they see Echidna coming for them again. Annabeth then suggests taking Percy to the altar at the highest point on the arch to get help from Athena.
We'll take Percy inside and we'll go to the temple's altar.
As they head inside, though, Echidna whispers something only Annabeth can hear. This gets her bothered, but as her friends ask what's wrong, she tells them that Echidna just informed her that Athena won't help them because she didn't like the box they sent to Olympus. Despite this, she still suggests taking Percy to the altar so they can fight Echidna there. After reaching the highest point, Annabeth decides to sacrifice herself to fight Echidna, while Grover takes Percy to continue his quest. Percy doesn't want this, and he tricks Annabeth into leaving the room so he can go inside and lock the door. Annabeth and Grover think he's making a mistake, but Percy says he can't let anything happen to them. Just then, Echidna and her pet show up to attack Percy. As he tries to fight, he gets knocked down badly by the monster, and Echidna breaks off a part of the room so that Percy will be thrown off. Before he can do anything about it, the monster knocks him off, but he still manages to hold on to something. Unfortunately, he's unable to hold on for long, but as he falls, he suddenly finds himself at the bottom of the ocean. Percy still looks scared and tries to swim back to the top, but he notices that his leg is stuck. A woman named Nereid then appears to him and says that Poseidon sent her to help his son. Percy looks shocked to hear this, but still tries to free himself. Nereid then mentions that Poseidon doesn't enjoy seeing Percy struggling on his quest. She adds that he loves Percy and has been watching him to ensure he's safe.
He's always been here.
As Percy looks confused, Nereid tells him to trust his father and just breathe. Elsewhere, Grover and Annabeth look scared because they don't know if Percy is still alive. While they're looking for his body, Annabeth sees 3 women sitting on a bench, with one of them cutting a thread. This scares her, but she doesn't say anything to Grover. Shortly after, they see Percy coming out of the nearby river, and his friends look happy to see him. He then says sorry for pushing them out of the room.
Look, I'm sorry about shoving you in the stairwell.
But they don't seem to be bothered about this. Percy also tells them that they need to head to Santa Monica to meet his dad. Grover and Annabeth then inform him that their journey will now be harder because the cops are after them again. Instead of taking a bus or train, Percy and his friends start walking. On the way, Percy tells them that his dad saved him when he fell. He also mentions that he now thinks his dad is not as bad as he used to believe.
It all feels different somehow.
Shortly after, they hear a motorcycle approaching them, so they find a place to hide beside the road. Percy then notices that Annabeth has been acting weird since she saw him, so she asks if there's a problem. Annabeth tells him and Grover about the women she saw earlier. She adds that they're the 3 fates who can tell what happens in the future. As Percy asks what it means for them to cut a thread, Annabeth mentions that one of them will die.
It means one of us is going to die.
Percy doesn't believe this, but Annabeth says it's bound to happen. Suddenly, the biker on the road stops near them and offers to help them with their mission. The kids are shocked to hear this, but they discover that the biker is Ares. He then tells them that Zeus also sent all his children to find the missing bolt. Annabeth thinks it's a bad idea to follow him, but Ares tells them to meet him at a nearby restaurant if they still want his help.
Zeus sent all of his kids out looking for the Master Bolt too.
After he leaves, Percy suggests going to meet him, but Annabeth still thinks they can't trust anyone. Despite this, Percy insists on seeing Ares, so Grover and Annabeth follow him. As they then meet him at the restaurant, Ares tells them that their mission will fail. Percy is shocked to hear this, but Ares shows him a video of Gabe speaking on a TV show and blaming his stepson for killing his mom. Ares adds that the FBI is already on the case.
Wait for it.
And he's sure they won't make it far unless he helps them. Annabeth still thinks he's up to something, but he says he would have killed them earlier if he wanted. He adds that regardless of what they do, Zeus will still start a war. Percy doesn't think he's telling the truth, but Ares says that Zeus is only using the bolt as an excuse to start a war. Percy doesn't think this is possible because the Oracle told him that the war will end after he finds the bolt.
The Oracle said if we return the bolt, there wouldn't be a war.
Ares asks if it's what he heard the Oracle say or what he heard Brunner interpret. Percy doesn't remember what he heard, but Ares tells him that all the gods are deceitful and good at betraying their kind. He then tells them a story about how his grandfather, Kronos, ate his aunts and uncles. Zeus eventually made his father spit them out, and after this, he cut Kronos into several pieces and threw him down a bottomless pit. Percy then asks for his help.
You said you can help. Can you?
but Ares says he won't do anything for them until they help retrieve his shield from a nearby amusement park. As Percy agrees, Ares mentions that he'll keep Grover with him as collateral. Percy doesn't like this plan, but Grover says he'll be fine. Following this, Percy leaves for the amusement park with Annabeth. As they get there, Percy tries to open the door, but realizes that there's a trap on it. He looks really scared, and Annabeth also gets worried because Percy might die if they don't find a way to destroy the trap.
Hold still.
Luckily, Annabeth realizes that the trap is fake, and it's only meant to help the amusement park owner, Hephaestus, to know the number of people entering his place. Percy and Annabeth then wonder how Ares lost his shield in the first place, but they soon figure out that he was likely having an affair with Hephaestus's wife.
Just push.
Shortly after, they also go on a scary ghost ride, and as they eventually see Ares' shield, they fall into a pool of water. The two of them nearly drown, but Percy channels his power and uses it to save Annabeth and himself. Just then, they see that Ares' shield is above a golden chair. After looking at it for a while, the kids realize that for them to get the shield, one of them must sit in the chair. Since anyone who sits on it will get glued to the chair and never leave, Annabeth immediately decides to do it, but Percy stops her. He then tells her that he has to be the one who sits there because he knows Annabeth is more likely to complete the quest without him. Annabeth doesn't like his plan, but Percy says he has to do it. Before he sits, Annabeth promises to save his mom from the underworld when she goes to meet Hades. He also tells her to come back and find a way to save him. Shortly after, he sits in the chair and gets absorbed to be a part of it. The shield falls immediately. But instead of leaving, Annabeth takes a look at the chair and tries to find a way to free Percy. While she's at it, Hephaestus shows up and tells her to leave with the shield to make her mom proud and happy with her again. However, Annabeth says she's tired of doing things she doesn't want to do just to please her mom or the other gods. She adds that Percy is different and he doesn't deserve to die. Hephaestus feels sorry for her, so he frees Percy and tells Annabeth that not everyone likes doing things in the way of the gods. He also tells Annabeth that he knows she's a good kid and he'll speak to Athena for her. Meanwhile, Grover asks Ares several questions about the bolt thief and his quest to find his father's bolt. Ares doesn't give up anything but appears to be hiding something. Shortly after, Annabeth and Percy show up with Ares' shield, and he then gets them a ride to a casino in Las Vegas, where they can summon Hermes and get him to take them to the underworld. Before they leave, Ares tells Percy to forget about helping Poseidon because he doesn't really care about his kids.
Who?
However, Percy warns him to be careful of how he speaks about Poseidon. After a while, the kids eventually get into the truck headed for Las Vegas. Before it starts moving, Grover tells Percy and Annabeth that from his conversation with Ares, he now knows who the bolt thief is. Shortly after, Percy falls asleep and has a dream in which he sees someone blaming the master thief for slipping up and failing to do something right. He adds that they need to get things ready for the next phase of their plan, which is after Zeus and Poseidon's war. The strange man also mentions that if the thief fails again, he'll have to hand over the job to someone else. He then turns to Percy and implies that the boy will be the replacement. Percy wakes up immediately but doesn't tell his friends about the dream. As they almost get to Vegas, Annabeth finds a way to contact Brunner.
Can you see where we are?
But Luke answers her call instead. He then says that Brunner is currently planning how he'll protect the camp if a war really breaks out. Annabeth and Percy then tell him that they've found the bolt thief and he needs to tell Brunner about it. As Luke asks who it is, Percy says it's Clarice. He adds that while Grover spoke to Ares, he tried to cover up the thief's identity, which implies that his favorite daughter, Clarice, is responsible for stealing the bolt for Hades. Luke says he'll tell Brunner immediately, and shortly after, Percy and his friends arrive at the Lotus Casino, where Hermes is believed to be hanging out with some friends. Before they start looking for Hermes, Grover remembers a story about some people who lost their memories after going to a place where they ate lotus flowers. Since Since the casino might be the perfect cover for such a place, the kids decide to look for Hermes without eating anything they're given. After a while, Grover says they need to split up to find Hermes. So Annabeth suggests taking Percy with her because he doesn't know what the god looks like. Grover then asks what he's supposed to do when he meets Hermes.
What do I say to him if I find him first?
And Annabeth tells him to find her first before telling him anything. After Grover leaves, Percy asks why she wants to speak to Hermes first, and she says there are things she knows about his relationship with his favorite son, Luke. She adds that while she and Luke were on their way to the camp, he talked about his mom and how he blames his dad for the things that happened to her after he abandoned them. She also mentions that she believes Hermes would do anything to get back on good terms with Luke. Elsewhere, Grover suddenly sees a legendary satyr named Augustus while he's eating a pack of chips. As he meets the man to talk about how much he and his uncle admire the man, he realizes that Augustus can't remember anything. Grover believes he has eaten the lotus flower through the chips, but he still tells the man what happened to his uncle during his quest to find Pan. Suddenly, the man says he has found Pan in the casino.
I found Pan.
And he would like Grover to come with him to meet the god of the wild. Grover follows him at first, but he eventually stops and says he doesn't have a searcher's license to go on such a quest. Augustus says he'll keep it a secret, and he even offers the boy some chips. Grover says he doesn't want the lotus flower, but Augustus tells him that it's just a bag of chips.
I can't eat the lotus flowers, Augustus.
Grover then wonders how Augustus lost his memory, despite eating only some chips. As he tries to figure it out, he suddenly forgets why he came to the casino and follows Augustus to where he's headed. It then turns out that the lotus flower has been pumped into the air inside the casino. Shortly after, Percy and Annabeth find Hermes, and he agrees to speak to them when he hears that they are Luke's friends. Annabeth then promises to help him convince Luke to see him again if he helps them find a way to the underworld. Hermes says there's actually a way to the underworld.
There is a way into the underworld?
But he can't take them because people never get out. He then mentions that he has gotten used to the bad feeling that comes with being unable to help his son with anything he's struggling with. Annabeth believes they wasted their time coming to the casino, so she tells Percy that they need to leave.
We don't have time to waste.
As she walks away, Hermes tells Percy that Poseidon was actually the one who made him feel more comfortable about watching his son struggle without doing anything to help. He adds that Poseidon always felt bad whenever Percy struggled, but he didn't do anything because he believed it was a part of parenting to let kids live their lives. As Percy is about to leave, Hermes tells him that the quest might not matter anymore because the deadline is now close. Percy then runs to meet Annabeth to inform her that the seconds spent in the casino actually go by like minutes, and they've spent a few days there already.
You picked Hermes' pocket?
He adds that, according to Hermes, the lotus flower is in the air, but they haven't forgotten much because they stayed together. Annabeth then tells Percy that she already stole Hermes' car keys while they were sitting with him. Before they can leave, though, they remember that they're supposed to meet with Grover, who is nowhere to be found. As they see Augustus, they ask him for Grover, but the man runs away. Percy then chases him down and asks for his friend.
Where's Grover?
Following this, he and Annabeth are directed to where Grover is busy playing a game. They immediately tell him that they need to leave, but he doesn't even remember them. Percy and Annabeth are shocked by this, but as they mention that they're supposed to be on a quest, Grover agrees to follow them. As they then look for Hermes' car, they realize that it's a taxi. They also find a note on the car with directions to the underworld, which happens to be from Hermes. In the note, Hermes tells the kids that they'll become travelers when they hit the road.
It says we'll become travelers once we're on the road.
Following this, Percy and his friends get into the car, but he drives recklessly as he tries to leave the parking lot. When he finally drives out, the car suddenly appears in front of the ocean. Percy realizes that they're already in Santa Monica, so he goes into the ocean to speak to his dad first. After he enters, he sees Nereid, and she tells him that Poseidon waited for as long as he could until he left to get his troops ready for the war because Zeus's deadline has passed. She adds that Poseidon wanted Percy to know that the war is not his fault and that he must now return to camp. Percy says he can't do that because he believes there's more to come after the war. Nereid admires his courage, and as he asks her to help him continue his quest, she gives him 4 pearls that will grant him safe passage out of the underworld. Percy is shocked to see that there's one more, but Nereid tells him that the last one is for his mom.
And then go save your mother.
Shortly after, Percy follows the map to the underworld, and it leads him to the store of another son of Poseidon named Procrustes, who is also called the murderer of travelers. Procrustes tries to get Percy to sleep in one of his beds so he can rest after a long journey, but the boy realizes that it's how the man kills his victims. Instead of falling for the trap, Percy distracts Procrustes, and Annabeth pushes him onto the bed after wearing her invisibility hat. Procrustes gets stuck and is unable to escape, so Percy and his friends find the door to the underworld. Before they go in, Procrustes says that Percy won't be able to save his mom, but the boy doesn't listen to him. He then gives Annabeth and Grover 1 pearl each, so they can leave the underworld if things get out of hand. Shortly after, the kids enter the underworld and immediately see a man leading some dead people through the main gate. They immediately run to the front of the line to pay the man to let them in, but as he realizes that they're alive,
You're not dead.
he sends his 3-headed dog after them. Unfortunately, the dog swallows Grover, but before it attacks Percy, Annabeth manages to calm the dog by patting one of its heads. It then spits out Grover, who uses his flying shoes to take Percy and Annabeth through the gate before the dogs chase them again. Following this, they see Hades' palace, but Grover realizes that he has lost the pearl Percy gave him. Percy tells him to forget about it and keep walking, but he can't seem to stop talking about it. Percy then gives him another pearl and tells his friends that after he saves his mom, he wants them to leave with her. Grover is shocked to hear this, and as he complains about Percy's plan, they suddenly see someone in front of them. The person doesn't say anything, and as the kids look closer, they see that they're surrounded by strange people. Annabeth then remembers hearing a story about lost souls who are bound by regret and are always stuck in the forest.
Souls here are bound by regret.
Suddenly, they hear a monster approaching them, so Percy and Grover run away. However, they turn back when they notice that Annabeth has gotten stuck in the forest because she has something she regrets not doing. Instead of wasting their time to save her, Annabeth tells them to continue the quest while she leaves the underworld with the pearl. Percy doesn't like this, but Annabeth leaves anyway. Much later, while Percy and Grover try to find their way to Hades' palace, the satyr suddenly starts flying towards a bottomless pit. Percy doesn't get what's happening, but Grover says it's the flying shoes. Before he falls into the pit, Percy saves him, but the shoes fall in. Percy then notices that his bag is heavy, and as he checks it, he sees the bolt inside. Percy and Grover are shocked by this, but they realize that Ares was the one who actually gave them the bag. Percy looks confused about what to do next.
Wait, this isn't my bag.
But Grover tells him to save his mom first. Percy then remembers the day he got sent away from school at a young age because he claimed he saw a winged horse. Sally tried to get the headmaster to take him back, but the man didn't listen. She then started finding new schools for Percy so he could leave immediately. This got Percy worried because he felt his mom was trying to get rid of him. He also felt bad and told her that he would never get rid of her if he was in her shoes. Sally doesn't say anything, but she just walks to the bar and cries. Shortly after, Poseidon shows up, and Sally says she's thinking of sending Percy to the camp
I'm going to take him to camp.
because she feels some creatures will soon start coming after him. Poseidon asks if it's the right choice, but Sally realizes that she doesn't want to give up her son yet because she wants him to know who he is before his father's people tell him other things. Sally then asks if he'd like to speak to Percy so he can at least hear his voice, but Poseidon says he'll do that one day.
He is better than that.
Back in the present, Percy and Grover enter Hades' palace, and he looks happy to see them. Percy immediately asks for his mom, and Hades shows him where he kept her body. He then says he has something to ask in return for her, but Percy says he's not giving up the bolt. He adds that he can't believe Ares wanted him to deliver the bolt to Hades. Quite interestingly, Hades looks shocked and says he doesn't want the bolt. He adds that he only wants his helm back because it was what was used by the bolt thief to commit the crime. Percy thinks Hades is lying, but the god says he's not concerned by whatever his brothers are doing. As he gives more reasons to make Percy believe him, the boy realizes that Kronos is behind everything. Hades says it's impossible because Kronos is at the bottom of a pit, but Percy says they almost fell into the pit with the bolt. He adds that he has been hearing Kronos' voice in his dreams, talking about taking over Olympus.
That definitely did not sound like you.
Hades looks scared and offers to give Percy, Sally, and Grover sanctuary in his palace. Percy asks why he wants to help them, and Hades says that if Kronos is already trying to get to Percy through his dreams, then he's in serious danger. He also asks for the bolt to use as protection against Kronos, but Percy refuses to give it up. He then tells Hades that he accepts the first offer of finding the helm to get his mom back. Hades thinks he's making a mistake, but Percy and Grover use their pearls to leave the underworld. As they land near Poseidon's cabin, they see Ares heading for them with his sword. Percy then challenges him to a one-on-one fight and says that if he draws first blood, he'll take Hades' helm from Ares. He also mentions that he'll give Ares the bolt if he loses. Ares laughs at this and says he'll kill Percy because if the boy stays alive, he'll let everyone know his plan. Percy then mentions that he already knows that Ares is working for Kronos. He also asks if Kronos got to Ares through his dreams, but the god gets pissed and says that gods don't dream. As the fight starts, Ares immediately beats up Percy, but before he kills him, the boy channels a huge wave from the ocean to knock down his opponent. Ares gets weakened by this, but before he does anything, Percy draws first blood. Ares gets pissed by this, but he says that Percy has gotten himself a permanent enemy. After he disappears, he leaves Hades' helm on the floor. The boy quickly picks it up and goes inside the cabin with his friends. There, he sees one of Hades' loyalists already waiting for him. Percy then gives her the helm and tells her to inform Hades not to forget his part of the deal. After she leaves, Percy tells his friends that he needs to complete his quest and stop the war. Annabeth and Grover believe he's making a mistake because Zeus's deadline has passed. Annabeth also warns him that Zeus will find a reason to kill him if he returns to the underworld. Percy says he needs to do something to stop the war because it's what Kronos wants. He also adds that since they know how Ares and Clarus are involved in the plan, Annabeth and Grover must warn Brunner so he'll know what to do. Annabeth still tries to convince Percy not to leave.
Zeus will never let you leave Olympus alive.
But he insists that he's tired of running away from monsters. Shortly after, Percy reaches Zeus's palace and gives him the bolt while saying he didn't steal it. He also reveals that Ares stole it for Kronos. Zeus looks shocked to hear this name, but he says nothing. Percy then tells him to stop the war, but he says he won't. Percy cannot believe this, and he tells Zeus that he's playing right into Kronos' plans. As he mentions that Kronos has plans to take over Olympus, Zeus says he always knew something like that would happen because it's the nature of gods to fight and conquer. Despite this, Zeus refuses to call off the war, and Percy tells him that his family is a mess. He also says that people only respect Zeus because they fear him. He adds that after Ares, more people will side with Kronos. Eventually, Zeus gets angry, but as he's about to kill Percy, Poseidon shows up and stops him.
I surrender.
He then surrenders and agrees to let Zeus win the war if he leaves his son. Zeus looks happy with this, but as Poseidon asks what they'll do about their father, he says they'll call a council meeting to discuss it later. Before Zeus leaves, he also tells Poseidon to ensure he never sees Percy again. Following this, Poseidon commends his son's bravery and says that it's something they both have. Percy then asks if gods dream, and Poseidon says they do. As he wonders why the boy wants to know, Percy asks if Poseidon dreams about his mom. Poseidon is left speechless by this, and he just throws a pearl on the floor so that Percy can leave the underworld. Shortly after, Percy returns to camp and gets applauded by all the other demigods. However, he sees Clarice still there, but before he says anything, Annabeth stops him and says there's a plan to report her to Brunner later.
I'll explain.
After the celebration, Percy asks why they didn't report Clarice yet, and Luke says it would have been unsafe for them to accuse her without any proof. Since he's back, though, Luke says he has told Brunner that they need to tell him something in the woods later that night. Annabeth also mentions that she'll keep watching Clarice to ensure she doesn't get spooked. That night, while Percy and Luke are walking in the woods, they sound happy to have finally completed the quest. However, Percy says he still finds it odd that a part of the prophecy has yet to happen. Suddenly, he realizes that the part about a friend betraying him was actually meant for Luke. As Percy accuses Luke of giving him the flying shoes to lead him directly to Kronos, the boy doesn't deny it. He then mentions that he didn't expect Percy to give the shoes to Grover. Percy feels betrayed, but Luke says he had to do it because he doesn't like the gods and wants to regain control of his life. Percy believes he's being manipulated by Kronos, but Luke says he has seen the light. He also mentions that he doesn't want to hurt Percy because he needs to recruit him instead.
I'm here to recruit.
He then draws out a sword and creates a portal to a secret world where they can go together to be free from their parents and also help Kronos bring back the Golden Age. Percy says he doesn't think their parents are so bad because they actually try their best. Luke doesn't believe this, and the two boys start fighting. Luke eventually injures Percy, but before he can do anything else, Annabeth shows up in the woods and stops him. He looks disappointed to see Annabeth, but instead of saying anything, he just runs into the portal. The next day, Percy starts packing his things so he can return to the cabin to see if his mom is back. Brunner asks if he wants an armed escort to follow him, but Percy says he doesn't think Luke wants him dead. Brunner says it's what bothers him the most, because he knows that Percy agrees with some of the things Luke said. He adds that Kronos can also be very persuasive, but Percy says he'll never be manipulated. Shortly after, he meets Annabeth, who is preparing to leave the camp to see her dad again.
And how do you feel about it?
Grover also meets them and informs his friends that he has now gotten a searcher's license, which will allow him to continue his uncle's quest. Percy looks happy about this, and he tells his friends that they need to make a pact to meet back in the camp after 1 year, no matter what happens. They all agree to do this, and after a while they head separate ways. Much later, Percy returns to the cabin and sees his mom there. She looks really happy to see him, but before he tells her everything that happened, she disappears, and Kronos shows up at the cabin. Percy realizes that he's dreaming, and he tells Kronos to leave his dream already because he won't get to him. However, Kronos says that they'll soon meet in the real world if Percy survives what comes next. Percy says he's sure he will, and that if Kronos is ready, he can come to the real world to find him. Kronos then sounds happy and says that Percy's survival is the key to his return. Suddenly, Percy wakes up from his dream and sees Sally in his room,
No kidding, kiddo. Time to wake up.
telling him to get ready to attend his new school. Percy says he would have liked to sleep for a few more minutes, and Sally asks if he had another nightmare. Percy says he did, and that he saw his grandfather again. Sally then asks what he said, but Percy jokes about Kronos saying something about how much the boy loves his mom. Sally finds this funny, and after Percy gets ready for school, they leave the house together.